This is not a real fire extinguisher. This is one from Counter-Strike 2, sat on an unassuming wall on the new version of the Office map. It isn't trying to wow, yet it's wowed me, because it's one of the first times this game has looked good enough to pass as real. Disclaimer, I'm not exactly a fire extinguisher expert. I wouldn't know powder from foam if it hit me in the face, and for years I thought you held this bit here and it squirted out here. So even though I now know better, if panicked in a fire emergency, I'd probably still revert to prior assumptions, so just bear that in mind when watching this video. But while I wouldn't know what kind of water to use to extinguish an Intel 3900K fire, I do have a passion for video game graphics, which is probably more applicable in this situation anyway, so there. The term photorealistic has been thrown about for decades to describe convincing video game graphics. It was even used to describe the original Source 1 version of Half-Life 2. But they're fairly safe with such claims because some photos are rubbish. But what I like about this fire extinguisher example from Counter-Strike 2 is that it's far simpler than most graphics these days are, yet the result is still more realistic. Even knowing that it's fake, I have to really stop and analyse it to try and figure out what distances it from reality. For a long time with video game graphics, you'd felt obvious things like its texture quality being too low and blobby, or its polygon count being too low and angular. But then, once these aspects of video games got good enough, you'd start faulting its lighting or the general feel of the image for being off in some way, kind of like those early CGI rendered movies. But here, they've got the lighting and general feel of the image spot on, and so we have to return back to faulting stuff like the texture quality and polygon count, but now to such a nitpicky level that we feel kind of silly for even trying to criticise these things. Oh look, this dial looks a bit blocky, and this white wall behind it has slightly blobby looking imperfections. The scratches on the fire extinguisher are a bit pixelated, and some of the angle changes to this hose section can be a bit abrupt. But we're reduced to such anal nitpickery, because let's be honest, it gets the rest of the image kind of right. The reflection sells it. But I'm also impressed with these shadows between the holder and the extinguisher itself. You just wouldn't get this sort of precision in older games. Look, it even appears to reflect the holder on this bit here. These sorts of minute details are usually reserved for pre-rendered, ray-traced images, yet here it is, in a competitive game where everything's designed for high FPS. If anything, it being in a game like this makes it all the more incredible that it looks this good. Because it's not meant to look great. This game is designed for speed, for high frame rates, its polygon count is intentionally low, the texture resolution as low as they think they can get away with. This is an instance where the artists have leaned heavily on clever lighting and shading effects to make up for shortcomings elsewhere. It's just that clever lighting and shading happens to be what the new Source 2 graphics engine is all about. So how does it manage these tiny little details? The self-shadowing on the fire extinguisher seems to show up even when ambient occlusion is disabled, yet it's still considered to be ambient occlusion, but I presume it to be some kind of pre-calculated lighting that's baked into the model's textures beforehand, to save on performance when you're playing the game. And the apparent reflection of the holder here, I don't actually think is a reflection of it. It is instead just some quirk of the roughness map, where it thinks the fire extinguisher curves inwards and thus lights it darker than the area above it. Although that's wrong to do, it just happens to do a great job of imitating how the reflection of the black holder would look once bounced off the fire extinguisher itself. Whoops. But so what, because the illusion works. So let's break it apart. Turning on wireframe shows that it's got roughly 2,400 polygons. Counted it myself. And this is quite a lot for a pointless model like this, but it's only 4 times more than this old Source 1 version had, and that looks terrible. So yeah, it could have been higher still, and there are graphical tricks that you can use like tessellation, which could have been used to smooth these kinds of edges out more upon close inspection. But let me make it clear that it doesn't really matter for a game like CS2. So what if we set all the game's settings to lowest? Is this enough to ruin the look of this fire extinguisher? Setting it all to lowest settings changes just 2 things about this. And it isn't to drop the polygon or texture quality, as you'd expect. The first of the changes it does make is to the shader detail, which when set to low instead of high, disables these high quality reflections and swaps it out for a generally reflective looking sheen instead. Clearly, this is where the magic happens. And when it's no longer using these accurate and potentially bright looking highlights from the surrounding scenery, it stops belonging where it is. And it isn't just the fire extinguisher. That bare white wall looks even more bare without its glossy coating, and the tile roof and plastic dividers may as well just be drawn on at low shader setting. So I know you don't care about graphics, it's only me going on and on and on about a fire extinguisher, and you look at me like, what are you talking about? And I know that a lot of you will just schlong this whole game down to low settings and be done with it, but please, I beg you, use high shaders. At this point, I expect the biggest criticism people will have about this image is that there's no reflection of your ugly mush in it. Like anyone would want to see that. So yes, this is one limitation with using cube maps for reflections instead of ray tracing, and is the one way in which this image could be improved. The other difference the lower settings makes is to quarter the shadow resolution. Yet despite being less precise, it does little to ruin the effect here, since the Extinguisher's shadow is so fuzzy in the first place, which is thanks to it being lit by such a large light, which causes shadows to look fuzzy and low resolution looking, even in real life. This one particular spot on this map looks pretty awesome, no matter how potato your PC. But this fire extinguisher model isn't exclusive to this one location. There's another one just around the corner here, and despite it having a sign above it to show everybody that this is where this beautiful fire extinguisher is, its lighting doesn't quite match as perfectly as the other one did, and in my opinion its reflections should be darker due to it being next to where this dark looking wall juts out. Valve, please fix. And this fire extinguisher model is found all over the Nuke map, accompanied by varying different signs to inform you that yes, it is still a fire extinguisher. Yet none of these examples look quite as perfect as it does on Office just here, up against a plain back wall. It seems like the more you add, the more there is to give away that this is a picture of a video game that isn't quite photorealistic just yet. Which makes this simple, unassuming spot on Office all the more special right now, and I can't wait to witness more examples of this simplicity punching well above its weight in the graphics department on other maps as well. While it looks very convincing, it doesn't behave as a fire extinguisher would. It can't be shot off the wall, nor can it be used, nor does it explode when shot, as it does in many other games, even those with much more primitive graphics. But again, CS2 doesn't require that, nor would it necessarily benefit from that sort of interactive element. And for my last trick, I'm going to show you how the same spot used to look in the previous Counter-Strike game. Are you ready?